Get your filthy hands away from my car, Julian Vance roared, his face contorted with absolute disgust as he violently kicked Maya Linwood's tin lunchbox across the polished concrete floor, sending her homemade food scattering into the grease traps. He pulled a crisp $100 bill from his wallet, crumpled it up, and threw it directly at her chest. I don't pay six-figure maintenance fees to have some unqualified black girl playing around with carbon ceramic brakes. Clean up your mess, take your garbage, and get back to the locker room where you belong. Look at you, you look more like a courthouse janitor than someone who should be touching high-end Italian engineering. Did you honestly think a patch of grease on your face makes you a master mechanic? Or are you just here to fill a diversity quota for the cameras? The 18 certified male technicians standing in the bay erupted into cruel, mocking laughter, completely blind to the terrifying truth. They didn't know that the brilliant young woman they were humiliating was the only person in the entire building who had just noticed a microscopic, fatal secret hidden beneath the chassis of the billionaire's $3 million hypercar. A deliberate, razor-sharp cut in the brake line was waiting to turn that vehicle into a high-speed coffin. Don't blink, and don't skip a single second of this incredible journey of justice and hidden genius. Drop your current city and your local time in the comments right now, and hit that subscribe button for Muse Stories so you never miss a tale of truth rising above arrogance. The morning air in Greenwich, Connecticut always carried the sharp, biting scent of old money, salt water, and unearned privilege. At exactly 7:45 a.m., the iron gates of Sterling Luxury Fleet Services rolled back with a silent hydraulic hiss. This was not a regular repair shop. It was a sanctuary for the mechanical elite, a high-tech fortress where New England's ultra-wealthy brought their rolling investments to be pampered. The floors were coated in a pristine white epoxy that reflected the brilliant LED overhead strips like a showroom mirror. There were no pools of discarded oil, no rusty oil drums, and no grease-stained rags carelessly tossed into corners. Every tool was laser-etched. Every diagnostic monitor cost more than a family sedan, and every technician wore immaculate, custom-tailored Navy jumpsuits with their certifications proudly embroidered across the chest. Among the 24 elite mechanics who occupied this space, Maya Linwood stood out like a solitary oak tree in a desert of manicured lawns. At 28 years old, she held a master's degree in automotive engineering from Georgia Tech, possessing an intuitive understanding of fluid dynamics and thermal expansion that left older veterans secretly terrified. Yet, inside the walls of Sterling Luxury Fleet Services, her advanced degrees were treated as mere pieces of decorative paper. To Chuck Sterling, the elitist third-generation owner of the establishment, Maya was nothing more than a convenient token, a strategic diversity hire meant to satisfy corporate tax incentives and project a progressive image to external auditors. While less qualified male technicians were routinely handed the keys to twin-turbocharged powerhouses, Maya was systematically assigned to routine fluid flushes, windshield wiper replacements, and the mind-numbing task of recalibrating tire pressure sensors. On this particular Tuesday morning, the delicate, suffocating peace of the workshop was shattered by the arrival of a legend. At exactly 10:14 a.m., the heavy glass bay doors slid upward to reveal a custom bare carbon fiber Pagani Huayra. The vehicle was a masterpiece of Italian engineering, powered by a twin-turbocharged V12 engine, capable of producing 700 horsepower. The man stepping out of the driver's cockpit was Julian Vance, a 63-year-old old-money technology mogul whose multi-billion-dollar investment portfolio gave him the power to alter global markets with a single text message. Julian was a man defined by a volatile temper and a deep, systemic arrogance that manifested in the way he looked down at anyone who worked with their hands. He had brought his prized possession to the shop for a comprehensive, high-pressure track inspection before an upcoming private racing event at Lime Rock Park, a high-profile gathering where the elite pushed their hypercars to the absolute limit. Maya had been standing near the tool cabinet when the Pagani rolled to a stop, its massive engine emitting a low rhythmic thrum that resonated deep within her chest. As Julian Vance stepped out, tossing his leather keys to Chuck Sterling with a careless, dismissive wave, Maya's trained eyes instinctively drifted down toward the undercarriage of the vehicle. While the rest of the technicians gasped at the rare carbon titanium bodywork, Maya noticed something that made her stomach drop. Near the edge of the driver's side skirt, a single, viscous drop of amber fluid was clinging to the aerodynamic undertray. It was an incredibly subtle anomaly, a minute blemish against the spotless carbon fiber, but to a master of hydraulic dynamics, it was a warning flare. Brake fluid. It shouldn't have been anywhere near the exterior trim of a perfectly maintained vehicle. Driven by her innate professional responsibility, Maya stepped forward, her clipboard tucked firmly beneath her arm. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling. Mr. Vance," she said, her voice calm, steady, and entirely professional. "Before anyone starts the diagnostic sequence, we need to inspect the hydraulic lines. There's an active fluid drop near the low-pressure seam. If the high-pressure system engages during an electronic test, it could compromise the entire circuit." Julian Vance froze. He turned his head slowly, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of Maya standing before him. His gaze slid from her braided hair down to her navy uniform, a visible wave of condescension washing over his wrinkled face. He didn't look at her clipboard. He didn't look at her name tag. He saw only her skin, her youth, and her gender. With a heavy, dramatic sigh, he slammed his leather briefcase onto the pristine hood of the $3 million car, the sound echoing through the silent bay like a gunshot. "Chuck, what is the meaning of this?" Julian sneered, his voice dripping with absolute contempt as he pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Maya's face. "Don't let her near my car. I don't pay six-figure annual maintenance fees to have some unqualified black girl playing around with carbon ceramic brakes. Clean up your mess, take your garbage, and get back to the locker room where you belong. Look at you. You look more like a courthouse janitor than someone who should be touching high-end Italian engineering. Did you honestly think a patch of grease on your face makes you a master mechanic? Or are you just here to fill a diversity quota for the cameras?" The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Then, like a coordinated wave, the 18 certified male technicians standing in the surrounding bays erupted into cruel, mocking laughter. Greg, the arrogant lead technician who had spent years viewing Maya as a threat to his position, laughed loudest of all, shaking his head in mock pity. Chuck Sterling didn't defend his most qualified engineer. Instead, he stepped forward with a sycophantic smile, bowing slightly to appease his wealthiest client. "My deepest apologies, Julian," Chuck said smoothly, his eyes flashing with cold anger as he glared at Maya. "She was completely out of line. She has no authorization to touch your vehicle. Greg will be handling your inspection, personally, using our state-of-the-art digital diagnostic suite. Maya, pack up your clipboard and get out of this bay immediately." Maya stood entirely still, her jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in her neck strained against her collar. The laughter of her peers burned against her skin, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She looked directly into Julian Vance's cold, arrogant eyes, seeing a man completely blinded by his own wealth and prejudice. Slowly, she turned on her heel and walked away, her footsteps echoing against the white epoxy floor. But as she retreated toward the shadows of the facility, her mind remained locked on that tiny, amber drop of fluid. The billionaires and the managers could humiliate her body, but they could not silence her intellect. She knew what she had seen. Something was profoundly wrong with that car. The humiliation did not end with her banishment from the main service floor. Following Julian Vance's departure, Chuck Sterling marched down to the locker rooms, his face twisted in a mask of elitist fury. He didn't ask Maya for her technical reasoning. He didn't care about the fluid drop she had identified. To him, she had embarrassed the company in front of its most influential patron. As an immediate punishment designed to crush her spirit and force her resignation, Chuck stripped her of all elite floor privileges and reassigned her to the lowest tier of the facility, the damp, dimly lit basement level, where the commercial oil traps were cleaned and discarded. Spare parts were sorted into rusted iron bins. "You stay down here until you learn your place, Linwood," Chuck spat, throwing a pair of heavy rubber aprons at her feet. "Greg is a certified factory specialist. He doesn't need a token hire telling him how to do an inspection. If I see your face on the main floor before Vance picks up his car tomorrow morning, I'll fire you for insubordination before you can even gather your tools." Down in the concrete belly of the building, the air was thick with the suffocating fumes of sulfur and stale transmission fluid. Maya spent the next 12 hours pulled away from the advanced engineering she loved, her hands buried deep in the toxic muck of the facility's waste management systems. The other technicians occasionally peered down the metal staircase, tossing empty soda cans into her workspace and laughing quietly among themselves. Greg had already posted a mocking message on the company's internal digital board, joking about the diversity hire trying to teach a billionaire how to drive. But Maya did not break. With every piece of heavy iron she sorted, and with every gallon of waste oil she pumped, her mind kept returning to the hydraulic architecture of the Pagani Huayra. She knew the vehicle's exact specifications by heart. The triple-circuit brake system relied on a very specific pressure threshold to actuate the carbon ceramic discs. A fluid drop meant a drop in pressure. But the location of the droplet she observed didn't align with a standard wear-and-tear leak. It was too far forward, running along the primary line that fed the rear calipers. By the time the clock on the concrete wall struck 11:30 p.m., the upper levels of the facility had fallen dead silent. The day shift had gone home, the lights had been dimmed to an automated energy-saving mode, and the evening cleaning crew had finished their rounds. The entire building was completely deserted, save for the security guard dozing in his glass booth at the front gate. Maya stood at the bottom of the basement stairs, peeling off her heavy rubber apron. Every muscle in her body ached, and her uniform was stained with industrial grease, but a powerful, unyielding instinct refused to let her leave. Her grandfather, a self-taught mechanic who had survived the Jim Crow South by relying on the flawless precision of his work, had always taught her one fundamental truth. The machine has no prejudice, Maya. It doesn't care who holds the wrench. It only tells the truth, and if you ignore it, someone pays with their life. Unable to silence the alarm bells ringing in her head, Maya quietly ascended the dark metal staircase, her soft-soled work boots making no sound against the steel treads. She stepped back onto the main service floor. The space was unrecognizable in the dark, illuminated only by the faint blue glow of the automated security monitors and the moonlight filtering through the high clerestory windows. There, sitting in the center of Bay 4, was Julian Vance's Pagani Huayra, resting silently on the massive hydraulic lift like a sleeping predatory animal. Greg had left his digital diagnostic terminal running beside the vehicle, a glowing green checkmark on the screen, indicating that the comprehensive safety inspection had been successfully completed. According to Greg's log, the vehicle was completely flawless and cleared for high-speed track testing. Maya approached the hypercar, her breath shallow. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a small high-intensity inspection flashlight, and dropped flat onto her back, sliding her body completely beneath the cold, carbon titanium belly of the $3 million machine. She clicked on the light, directing the sharp white beam up into the tight, complex maze of the undercarriage. She bypassed the oil pan, traced the line of the exhaust shielding, and brought the light to rest on the primary braided stainless steel brake line. What she saw made her blood run entirely cold. It wasn't a natural leak. It wasn't a loose fitting or a cracked gasket caused by age. Someone had taken a specialized, razor-sharp microblade or a laser-cutting tool and made a microscopic, diagonal slit directly into the inner synthetic core of the high-pressure line, right where the line curved over the chassis frame. The cut was an engineering masterpiece of malice. It was buried deep within the stainless steel mesh weave, completely invisible to standard visual inspections from the side, and tight enough to hold fluid under low-pressure city driving. But the moment Julian Vance took the car onto the racetrack, hitting speeds over 180 miles per hour and slamming on the pedal with maximum force, the sudden, extreme hydraulic spike would cause the slit to violently burst open. The fluid would drain in less than 2 seconds, completely neutralizing the rear brakes and sending the car hurtling into the nearest concrete wall without any warning. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't professional incompetence. This was an assassination attempt. This was cold-blooded, pre-planned murder disguised as a mechanical failure. Suddenly, the heavy, motorized iron gears of the shop's rear-loading bay door began to groan, vibrating through the concrete floor. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The beam of her flashlight snapped off instantly. The massive steel door was rolling upward, letting in a blast of cold midnight air and the harsh, sweeping headlights of an unmarked vehicle. Trapped beneath the hypercar with nowhere to run, Maya froze, pressing her body as flat as humanly possible against the cold concrete floor, staring through the shadows as two dark silhouettes stepped into the bay. In the deep, terrifying darkness beneath the Pagani, Maya Linwood squeezed her eyes shut, her mind racing backward through time as she tried to control the desperate trembling of her hands. The smell of cold grease against her cheek felt exactly like the floor of her grandfather's small, unheated garage in the west end of Atlanta, Georgia. That was where her journey had truly begun, built on a foundation of relentless sacrifice and unyielding discipline. Maya had spent her entire youth watching her family give up everything so she could have a chance to enter the rooms where decisions were made. Her mother had worked 16-hour shifts as a night shift nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital, while her grandfather, a brilliant man who had been denied formal engineering credentials during the decades of segregation, spent his weekends teaching Maya how to listen to the language of internal combustion engines. When she earned a full academic scholarship to Georgia Tech's elite aerospace and mechanical engineering program, her neighborhood had thrown a block party. She had spent 5 years living on black coffee and instant noodles, working the graveyard shift at a commercial diesel truck yard to pay for her textbooks while maintaining a perfect 4-grade point average. She had earned her Automotive Service Excellence, ASE, Master Technician certifications before she even graduated, achieving perfect scores on exams that men with 30 years of experience routinely failed. She had written her master's thesis on high-pressure hydraulic variance under extreme thermal load, the exact science that governed the very vehicle sitting above her right now. Yet, when she moved to Greenwich to take what she believed was a dream job at Sterling Luxury Fleet Services, she discovered that the world of high finance and luxury engineering was still governed by the ancient, unspoken rules of prejudice. To Chuck Sterling and the old money clientele, her credentials were treated like an anomaly, an artificial product of modern political correctness. They saw her skin, they saw her background, and they decided her ceiling would be cleaning the grease traps for $48,000 a year, while men who couldn't explain the basic laws of thermodynamics were handed 6-figure salaries. The sound of footsteps cracking against the gravel outside shattered her memories, pulling her violently back to the dangerous present. The two silhouettes walked into the bay, their shadows stretching long and distorted across the white epoxy floor under the dim security lights. Maya held her breath, her chest pressing tightly against the low-clearance undertray of the Pagani. "Is it done?" a sharp, anxious voice demanded. The voice was young, entitled, and thick with a nervous, trembling energy. Maya recognized it immediately. It was Braden Vance, the 24-year-old son of Julian Vance. Braden was a notorious fixture in the local tabloids, a reckless, trust fund gambler who had spent the last 3 years destroying his father's tech investments on high-stakes offshore betting platforms and failed real estate schemes. "Keep your voice down," a second voice hissed. Maya's stomach turned. It was Greg, the lead technician who had spent the morning mocking her. The security guard is paid to watch the cameras, not the floor, but he isn't deaf. The line is cut exactly where you specified. The inner synthetic core is sliced at a 45-degree angle. It passed our automated digital scan because the pressure only drops when the fluid temperature hits 90 degrees Celsius. To the computer, it looks completely factory standard right now. "And you're absolutely sure it won't fail on the highway?" Braden whispered, his boots pacing back and forth beside the Pagani's front tire, just inches from Maya's face. "He drives like an old lady on the public roads. He won't hit the brakes hard until he gets to the third turn at Lime Rock. That's the downhill chicane. If it bursts there, he goes off the mountain at 140 miles per hour. "It's foolproof, Braden," Greg replied, a cold, transactional sneer in his voice. "The state troopers will write it off as a structural failure caused by a manufacturing defect in the carbon ceramic assembly. The insurance company won't find a damn thing because the heat of the crash will melt the remaining rubber lines anyway. Your father's $50 million corporate life insurance policy will clear probate in less than 30 days, and my offshore account gets the $500,000 we agreed on. Just make sure you delete the offshore transfer records from your phone." "I already did," Braden said, his voice shaking as he pulled out a sleek, gold-plated smartphone. "My father thinks he's an unkillable god just because he has $1 billion in the bank. He treated me like garbage my entire life, holding the trust fund over my head like a leash. By tomorrow afternoon, I'll finally be running Vance Tech Holdings." Maya felt a cold sweat break out across her forehead. She knew she was witnessing a capital crime. Slowly, methodically, she slid her right hand into her uniform pocket, her fingers wrapping around her personal smartphone. She knew that if she made a single sound, these two men would kill her right here on the shop floor and hide her body in the industrial oil vats below. Moving with agonizing slowness, millimeter by millimeter, she unlocked her screen, set the volume to 0, and turned on the voice recorder app, holding the microphone out toward the edge of the car's side skirt. "Just make sure that black girl doesn't come back up here before tomorrow morning," Braden added, his tone dripping with the same effortless bigotry his father had displayed earlier. "She was snooping around the tires today. If she points out a leak to the track inspectors, the whole plan falls apart." "Don't worry about her," Greg laughed, a wet, sickening sound. "Chuck has her locked in the basement scrubbing grease traps. He's looking for an excuse to fire her anyway. Tomorrow morning, your old man climbs into this seat, and by noon, your problems are solved." As Greg spoke the final words, Maya began to carefully pull her hand back beneath the chassis. But her uniform jacket caught on a small, protruding metal clip of the emergency hydraulic lift valve. The sudden tension caused her elbow to slip, her knuckle rapping sharply against the steel frame of the Pagani's underbelly. Clang! The small, metallic echo sounded like a thunderclap in the dead silence of the abandoned workshop. Greg's laughter stopped instantly. The pacing of Braden's boots froze. "What the hell was that?" Braden whispered, his voice rising in sudden panic. "Did you hear that? Someone's in here." Maya froze, her eyes wide in the dark, her phone clutched tightly against her chest as the beam of Greg's heavy industrial flashlight suddenly snapped on, the bright white light cutting across the floor and sweeping directly toward the dark gap beneath the hypercar. The blinding beam of Greg's industrial flashlight sliced across the white epoxy floor, stopping mere inches from Maya's boots. Beneath the car, she pulled her legs tightly into her chest, pressing her spine against the oily underside of the chassis. Her heart pounded so violently against her ribs, she was certain they could hear it. "Check the lift controls," Greg whispered sharply, his footsteps crunching closer. "The hydraulic valves sometimes creak when the pressure settles overnight." Braden shifted nervously. "Man, let's just get out of here. The cash is in your locker. We're done." Greg paused, the flashlight beam lingering on the edge of the Pagani's side skirt before he finally clicked it off. Fine, let's go. Don't look back until the news breaks tomorrow. The heavy iron gears of the loading bay door groaned once more as they exited, rolling down until a solid, mechanical thud signaled they were gone. The workshop plunged back into suffocating silence. Maya lay entirely still for a full 2 minutes before sliding out from under the hypercar. Her hands were shaking, but her fingers gripped her smartphone tightly. She checked the screen. The voice recorder app showed a 45-second audio file. Every word of their conspiracy was preserved in crisp, high-definition digital audio. She checked the shop clock. 12:15 a.m. Maya slipped back down to the basement, gathered her personal belongings, and left through the side fire exit, avoiding the sleeping security guard. She drove her battered sedan to a quiet parking lot 3 blocks away. She knew she couldn't just go to the local precinct without proof. Chuck Sterling had deep political connections in Greenwich. She spent the rest of the night uploading the audio file to a secure cloud drive and emailing a copy to Detective Marcus Vance, a state investigator she had assisted 6 months prior during a commercial insurance fraud case. Marcus was an objective, no-nonsense investigator who respected her brilliant technical mind. At 8:00 a.m. the next morning, Maya walked right through the front glass doors of Sterling Luxury Fleet Services, completely defying Chuck's orders to stay in the basement. The main bay was already buzzing with energy. Julian Vance stood near the customer lounge, surrounded by his entourage and 2 track day coordinators. He was wearing a professional racing suit, his expensive carbon fiber helmet resting on a leather chair. Chuck Sterling was personally polishing the Pagani's front fender, while Greg stood nearby, wearing a smug, confident smile. Maya marched directly past the service counter and stepped straight into the center of the elite bay. "Mr. Vance," she called out, her voice cutting through the chatter of the room like a razor blade. "Do not get into that car." The entire room fell dead silent. The technicians stopped mid-motion. Chuck Sterling's face turned from a sycophantic grin to a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He dropped his microfiber cloth and stepped toward her. "Linwood, what the hell did I tell you? You were explicitly ordered to stay off this floor. Security!" "Shut up, Chuck," Maya snapped, her eyes locked onto the billionaire. She turned back to Julian Vance. "Your son Braden and your lead technician Greg sabotaged your vehicle last night. The rear braided stainless steel brake line has a microscopic slit. The moment you hit the high-pressure braking zone at turn 3 at Lime Rock, the line will burst, and you will lose all rear stopping power at 180 miles per hour. Julian Vance's face went incredibly pale for a fraction of a second before his deep-seated arrogance rushed back to the surface. He looked at Maya's grease-stained uniform, then at her braided hair, his expression twisting into absolute disgust. "You again?" he sneered, stepping forward. "The affirmative action cleaner has jokes. Chuck, I told you to keep this unqualified girl away from my property. Now, she's making up insane stories because she got demoted?" "Mr. Vance, I have proof," Maya began, pulling out her phone, but Greg stepped forward, completely cutting her off. "Mr. Sterling, I caught her sneaking around my workstation yesterday, and look what I found in her locker during this morning's routine tool audit." Greg reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy, antique digital torque wrench, a rare, laser-etched heirloom passed down to Maya by her grandfather. "She stole this specialized equipment from our high-end inventory. She's trying to extort Mr. Vance because she knows she's about to be fired for theft." "That's my grandfather's wrench," Maya shouted, her voice shaking with rage at the sheer, calculated tra-o-tra of her colleague. "You stole that from my personal toolbox." Chuck Sterling didn't hesitate. He grabbed Maya violently by the upper arm, shoving her toward the exit. "I have heard enough. You are fired, Linwood. Effective immediately. Not only are you done here, but I am personally filing a grand larceny report with the state board. I will make sure your mechanical engineering credentials are permanently revoked across the entire country. You will never hold a wrench in a certified shop as long as I breathe." The 18 male technicians erupted into a chorus of jeers and mocking applause. Greg smirked, crossing his arms in absolute triumph. Maya looked around the room, seeing nothing but a wall of prejudice and corruption. She ripped her arm out of Chuck's grip, her eyes flashing with a dangerous, quiet dignity. "You think you can erase the truth by throwing me out?" she said, her voice dropping to a piercing whisper that made Chuck freeze. "Go ahead. Drive the car, Mr. Vance. But remember my face when you hit the pedal and nothing happens." Maya turned and walked out of the bay, her head held incredibly high, as security escorted her into the pouring rain. Behind her, the roaring V12 engine of the Pagani Huayra screamed to life. The cold autumn rain soaked Maya to the bone as she sat in her battered sedan outside the heavy iron gates of the facility. Through the blurred windshield, she watched the custom carbon fiber Pagani Huayra roll out of the driveway. Julian Vance was behind the wheel, his son Braden sitting in the passenger seat, acting the part of the supportive co-pilot while secretly waiting for his father's violent demise. Greg stood under the awning of the shop, watching them disappear down the wet, winding asphalt of Route 7 toward the Lime Rock racing circuit. Maya's hands gripped her steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had every reason to drive away. They had humiliated her, kicked her food across the floor, insulted her race, called her unqualified, and threatened to destroy her hard-earned career. If Julian Vance drove off a cliff, it would be the ultimate poetic justice for his arrogance. But as she looked at her grandfather's initials, carved into a small wooden keychain hanging from her rearview mirror, she knew she couldn't let bitterness corrupt her integrity. "We don't fix cars just for the money or the pride, Maya," his voice echoed in her mind. "We fix them because a broken machine is a lie, and our job is to keep people safe from the lies." She slammed her car into drive and hit the accelerator, following the hypercar from a safe distance. At the same time, her phone Bluetooth connected to the dashboard. She dialed Detective Marcus Vance. "Maya, I just listened to the audio file you sent." Marcus's voice boomed through the speakers, urgent and sharp. "I'm looking at the digital logs you attached from the shop's computer terminal. The thermal and hydraulic pressure metrics don't make sense for a healthy system. Where is the vehicle right now?" "They just left the Greenwich shop, Detective," Maya said, her voice calm but moving with a rapid, intense energy. "They are heading north on Route 7 toward the Lime Rock circuit. Julian Vance is driving. He thinks the car is flawless because Greg cleared the electronic diagnostic check. But I did the fluid dynamics math. Under casual driving, the fluid temperature stays below 70 degrees. The synthetic lining stays intact, but the moment he hits the steep downhill curves before the track, the engine heat will radiate directly onto that exposed brake line. I'm dispatching 3 state trooper cruisers for an emergency intercept right now," Detective Marcus Vance declared. "But Route 7 is undergoing construction near the Danbury border. If he takes the high-speed bypass, my guys won't catch him before the downhill grade. I need you to stay on him and give me real-time coordinates." Maya pressed her foot flat against the floorboard, her old sedan screaming as she navigated the slick, treacherous curves of the Connecticut highway. Up ahead, the $3 million Pagani was a blur of dark carbon fiber, its twin-turbocharged V12 effortlessly eating up the miles. Julian Vance was accelerating, growing more confident as the highway cleared out. He didn't know that with every mile he traveled, the glowing exhaust manifold was pouring intense, radiative heat directly onto the primary rear brake line. The degraded rubber inside the braided steel sleeve was expanding inward, narrowing the vital hydraulic channel and creating a ticking time bomb. Maya kept her eyes locked on the hypercar's taillights. She was checking her dashboard clock, 11:42 a.m. They were approaching the steep, 3-mile downhill decline known locally as the Devil's Chute, a treacherous section of highway with a sharp 90-degree rock wall curve at the very bottom. It was the exact environment that replicated the heavy braking forces of a racetrack. Suddenly, the flashing red and blue lights of two state trooper cruisers appeared in Maya's rearview mirror, roaring past her at over 100 miles per hour. They were trying to get ahead of the Pagani to block the intersection at the bottom of the hill. Julian Vance saw the police lights in his mirrors and grew irritated. Instead of slowing down, his arrogant instinct was to show off the capabilities of his machine. He tapped the downshift paddle, the V12 engine, roaring in a violent crescendo as the car lunged down the steep incline, hitting speeds well over 110 miles per hour on the wet asphalt. Maya watched in absolute horror as the Pagani rapidly approached the sharp rock wall curve at the bottom of the Devil's Chute. The lead police cruiser was parked horizontally across the lane, attempting to force a stop. Inside the Pagani, Julian Vance lifted his racing boot and slammed it down onto the brake pedal to bring the vehicle to a halt before the blockade. But the pedal didn't catch. Under the extreme, sudden hydraulic pressure spike of the high-speed stop, the microscopic 45-degree slit inside the heat-weakened brake line violently tore wide open. A jet of hot, pressurized brake fluid sprayed directly onto the exhaust shield, evaporating into thin air in less than a second. The brake pedal went entirely soft, hitting the floorboard with a sickening hollow click. The $3 million hypercar didn't slow down. It kept hurtling forward like an unguided missile, straight toward the police cruiser and the solid stone ravine beyond. Julian Vance screamed, his hands gripping the steering wheel so hard the leather groaned. Beside him, Braden turned completely pale, his gold-plated phone flying out of his hands and smashing against the carbon fiber dashboard as the car careened wildly out of control. With no rear stopping power, the Pagani's high-tech electronic stability control systems went into catastrophic error. Acting on pure, desperate survival instinct, Julian grabbed the mechanical emergency handbrake and violently pulled it upward, while slamming the paddle shifters downward to force the transmission into first gear. The rear tires locked up instantly, emitting a violent shriek of burning rubber and white smoke that mixed with the pouring rain. The hypercar spun completely sideways, missing the state trooper's parked cruiser by mere inches, and slammed violently backward into the deep gravel runaway ditch at the edge of the ravine. The massive impact threw a huge cloud of gray rocks and mud into the air, the vehicle finally grinding to a dead halt just 2 feet away from a jagged rock wall that would have crushed the cockpit like a tin can. The twin-turbocharged V12 engine sputtered and died with a heavy, metallic hiss. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. The room of the outdoor canyon was dead silent, save for the sound of the rain pattering against the cracked carbon fiber bodywork. Julian Vance pushed his airbag aside, his chest heaving as he gasped for air, his hands trembling violently. He pushed the gull-wing door upward and stumbled out onto the wet asphalt, falling to his knees, his multi-billion-dollar pride completely shattered. Braden climbed out right behind him, his face completely devoid of color, his body shaking as he looked around at the 3 state trooper cruisers that were already boxing them in, their sirens wailing through the canyon. Detective Marcus Vance stepped out of the lead cruiser, followed immediately by Maya Linwood, who carried a specialized, heavy black plastic diagnostic case. Julian looked up from the wet ground, his eyes wide with terror and confusion as he saw Maya approaching. You knew?" he stammered, his voice cracking, completely stripped of his billionaire swagger. "How did you?" "The computers said it was perfect." "Computers only read what the sensors are programmed to see, Mr. Vance," Maya said, her voice entirely calm, cold, and professional as she stepped up to the smoking vehicle. "But a trained engineer actually understands the physics of the machine." Detective Marcus Vance turned to the state troopers. "Cordon off the vehicle. Nobody touches anything except Miss Linwood. She is our lead technical forensic expert for this investigation." Maya didn't waste a second. She popped the latches on her diagnostic case and pulled out a high-definition, flexible fiber optic endoscopic camera connected to a portable monitor screen. To maximize the interaction and highlight the technical reality for the witnesses, Maya deliberately marched over to the front of the hypercar. She popped the front latches and pointed the camera directly into the primary hydraulic routing channel adjacent to the massive engine block. "Look closely at the monitor, Mr. Vance," Maya ordered, turning the screen so the billionaire, the state troopers, and a terrified Braden could see. On the portable screen, the fiber optic camera illuminated the braided stainless steel brake line running through the front engine bay. Right where the high-pressure line made its primary curve, the stainless steel weave had been neatly separated, revealing a clean, razor-sharp, 45-degree diagonal cut through the inner synthetic core. The edges of the cut were perfectly smooth, the unmistakable signature of a specialized industrial microblade, completely free of any natural tears or road debris damage. "This isn't a mechanical failure, Detective," Maya declared loudly, her voice echoing through the rainy canyon. "This is intentional, premeditated sabotage." The cut was engineered to remain hidden under city pressures, but to open completely under maximum thermal expansion and high-pressure braking load. Someone wanted this car to become a high-speed coffin today. Julian Vance stared at the clean cut on the screen, his breath catching in his throat. Greg told me he checked it twice. He swore it was flawless." "Greg didn't act alone, Mr. Vance," Maya said quietly. She pulled her smartphone from her uniform pocket and unlocked the screen. "Your lead technician didn't have a financial motive to kill you, but the person sitting in your passenger seat did." Maya pressed play on the audio file. The 45-second recording blared through the rainy air, crisp and clear. Braden's nervous, entitled voice echoed across the asphalt. "He drives like an old lady on the public roads. If it bursts there, he goes off the mountain at 140 miles per hour. My father thinks he's an unkillable god. Tomorrow morning, your old man climbs into this seat, and by noon, your problems are solved." Julian Vance froze. He turned his head slowly, looking at his son Braden, who was standing against the guardrail. The billionaire's eyes went completely wide, with a mixture of absolute horror and profound heartbreak, as the crushing truth finally came to light. The rain continued to pour, washing the spilled brake fluid into the mud, but nobody in the canyon dared to breathe. Braden Vance stood paralyzed against the rusted steel guardrail, his hands trembling so violently he could barely hold his balance. Two state troopers stepped forward, their heavy leather boots crunching on the wet gravel, and closed the distance. Within seconds, the sharp, metallic snap of steel handcuffs echoed through the ravine. Braden burst into frantic, sobbing tears, his arrogant posture collapsing into a pathetic display of begging. "Dad, please! I had no choice. The debts, the offshore brokers said they would kill me." Braden shrieked as he was dragged toward the back of a police cruiser. Julian Vance didn't look at his son. He remained on his knees, staring blankly at the wet pavement, a broken man destroyed by the very empire he had built. "We need to secure the original facility immediately," Detective Marcus Vance announced, gesturing for Maya to climb back into the lead cruiser. "Miss Linwood, I need you to walk us through the shop's server architecture. If they altered the safety logs, the physical metadata is still resting on the local drive." At exactly 1:15 p.m., a phalanx of 5 state trooper vehicles roared into the pristine driveway of Sterling Luxury Fleet Services, their sirens completely silent, but their roof lights casting a flashing red and blue glare against the massive glass windows. Inside the bay, the 18 certified male technicians were standing around Greg's workstation, sharing a box of donuts and laughing about a viral video. Chuck Sterling was in his glass-walled office, sipping an expensive espresso and reviewing the grand larceny paperwork he had prepared to permanently ruin Maya's career. The heavy glass front doors were suddenly thrown open. Detective Marcus Vance marched into the center of the white epoxy floor, followed by 4 armed troopers. The room fell completely silent. The smirks on the technicians' faces froze instantly. Greg dropped his wrench, the heavy metal tool clattering loudly against a carbon titanium wheel hub. "What is the meaning of this?" Chuck Sterling shouted, storming out of his office with his chest puffed out in elitist indignation. "This is a private, high-end facility. You cannot just barge in here without." Chuck Sterling, Detective Vance, cut him off, his voice flat and dangerous. "Step away from the desk. We are executing a federal felony warrant for conspiracy to commit capital murder, corporate fraud, and evidence tampering." Maya stepped out from behind the troopers, her clothes still damp from the highway storm, but her posture entirely straight. She walked straight to the master diagnostic terminal, completely ignoring Greg, who had turned a sickening shade of translucent gray. Chuck Sterling watched her, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. "Linwood, you're supposed to be under arrest for theft. The only thieves here are the ones who stole my grandfather's wrench to cover up a murder plot," Maya said, her voice dropping to a piercing, ice-cold register. She plugged an external solid-state drive into the master server console. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with masterful speed, bypassing Greg's encrypted user profile in less than 90 seconds. "Look at the screen, Detective," Maya called out, pointing to the scrolling lines of code. At exactly 11:45 p.m. last night, Greg's unique employee credentials were used to manually delete the raw hydraulic pressure wave logs for the Pagani Huayra. He overwrote the systemic warning flags with a generic factory clearance code. But he forgot that the local backup drive automatically archives the raw binary files every hour. "That's a lie. She's manipulating the software." Greg screamed, his voice cracking into a panicked shriek, as 2 troopers stepped behind his toolbox, grabbing his arms and forcing them behind his back. "Braden promised me the offshore transfer would be untraceable." "Thank you for the confession, Greg," Detective Marcus Vance said smoothly, as the handcuffs locked into place around the lead technician's wrists. Chuck Sterling's arrogant facade completely evaporated. He fell back into a leather rolling chair, his hands shaking so violently he spilled his espresso onto his designer suit. He looked around his pristine, multi-million-dollar bay, realizing that within 24 hours, the reputation of Sterling Luxury Fleet Services would be utterly dragged through the mud. The 18 technicians stood entirely frozen, none of them daring to look Maya in the eye. The very woman they had mocked, the woman they had labeled a diversity hire, who belonged in the basement scrubbing grease traps, had just completely dismantled their entire elite empire using nothing but her intellect and a laptop. The heavy iron bay doors remained open, letting in the cool, rain-washed air as Julian Vance's private town car pulled slowly onto the white epoxy floor. The billionaire stepped out of the back seat. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. His expensive racing suit was stained with mud from the highway ditch, and his eyes were hollow, stripped of the fierce, unearned arrogance that had defined his entire existence. He walked slowly through the center of the workshop, passing the silent rows of technicians who immediately looked down at the floor, unable to meet his gaze. Julian stopped exactly 3 feet in front of Maya's workstation. He didn't look down at her boots. He didn't look past her. For the first time since he had entered the facility, he looked directly into her eyes, seeing her not as a skin color or a statistic, but as the master engineer who had stood between him and a violent grave. The journalists from the local Greenwich business journals and automotive blogs had already gathered outside the gates, their cameras flashing through the glass entry doors. In front of the entire assembly of mechanics, the state troopers, and the flashing lenses, the multi-billion-dollar tech mogul slowly lowered his head, dropping his shoulders in a profound, public display of humility. "Miss Linwood," Julian Vance said, his voice cracking with an emotion he could barely contain, I do not have the words to properly express the depth of my regret. This morning, I treated you with a disgusting lack of basic human decency. I let my own blindness and prejudice insult your intelligence and your dignity. You tried to save my life, and I handed you a $100 bill and told you to clean up the floor. If it weren't for your unyielding integrity, I would be dead at the bottom of a canyon right now, and my own son would be spending my fortune. Please, forgive me." The room remained dead silent. Maya stood behind her tool chest, her hands resting flat on the cold steel surface. She didn't smile, and she didn't gloat. Her face remained a portrait of calm, unshakable dignity. "Your apology is accepted, Mr. Vance," Maya said, her voice carrying to every corner of the silent bay. "But remember this, the machine has no color. The hydraulic fluid doesn't care about my background, and the carbon ceramic brakes don't check a diversity quota before they fail. I didn't save you because I wanted your gratitude. I saved you because I am a certified engineer, and my job is to make sure the machine tells the truth." Julian Vance nodded slowly, wiping a stray tear from his weathered cheek. He then turned his gaze to Chuck Sterling, his eyes instantly turning into shards of ice. "Chuck, as of this exact second, Vance Tech Holdings is pulling our entire commercial and luxury fleet account from this establishment. That is 84 high-performance vehicles, effective immediately. I am also calling the board of directors at the New England Automotive Council. By tomorrow morning, your elite certification will be permanently revoked." Chuck Sterling went entirely white, his hands clutching the edge of his desk, as he realized his family's three-generation business was effectively bankrupt. Julian turned back to Maya, pulling a sleek leather checkbook from his jacket. "Miss Linwood, I want to make this right. I want to write you a blank check. 5 million, 10 million. Whatever it takes for you to open the most advanced performance engineering facility in New England, right here in Greenwich. You will be the sole owner, with 0 strings attached." Maya looked at the checkbook, then looked at the initials of her grandfather carved into her keychain. She gave Julian a small, proud smile. "I don't accept charity, Mr. Vance. But if you are offering a standard venture capital investment at a competitive interest rate, my legal team will review the corporate prospectus tomorrow morning. You didn't pay for my silence today. You are investing in my expertise." Julian's eyes widened in profound respect. "It will be structured exactly as an investment, Miss Linwood, on your terms." 1 year later, the autumn air in Greenwich, Connecticut, felt entirely different. The old, suffocating weight of prejudice had been replaced by a bright, roaring energy that echoed from a magnificent, newly constructed facility on the main commercial strip. The building was a marvel of modern architecture. Massive glass walls, solar-paneled roofing, and a massive, gleaming brushed steel sign that stretched across the front entrance. Linwood Advanced Engineering and Robotics. Inside, the environment was a complete revolution. The floors were still a pristine, reflective white epoxy, but the people operating the diagnostic terminals reflected the true diversity of the country. Maya Linwood stood in the center of Bay 1, wearing a sleek, custom-tailored black mechanic's jumpsuit, with her name and Chief Executive Officer elegantly embroidered in gold thread across her chest. Her business was thriving. Linwood Advanced Engineering had not only secured the entire Vance Tech fleet account, but had become the primary historic restoration contractor for luxury collectors across the entire East Coast. But Maya's true passion project was running in the west wing of the facility, the Linwood Youth Apprentice Academy, a fully funded program where underprivileged teenagers and young women from minority communities were brought in on full scholarships to learn the advanced physics of automotive design. The villains of the past had met their absolute, unyielding fates. Braden Vance had pleaded guilty to attempted felony murder and was currently serving a 15-year sentence at a maximum security state penitentiary, his trust fund permanently dissolved. Greg, the lead technician, had his mechanical licenses permanently revoked and was serving an 8-year sentence for corporate sabotage and fraud. Sterling Luxury Fleet Services had closed its doors forever. 6 months prior, the building sold at an auction to pay off Chuck Sterling's mounting legal liabilities. As Maya was adjusting the fuel mapping on a classic Aston Martin, the front glass doors of the bay opened quietly. A young man stepped into the light, holding a battered leather toolbox. It was Marcus, the former junior assistant mechanic from Chuck's old shop, one of the few who hadn't laughed that Tuesday morning, but who had stayed quiet out of fear of losing his job. He stopped a few feet away, his head lowered in deep embarrassment, and carefully reached into his toolbox. He pulled out a heavy, antique, digital torque wrench, the exact laser-etched heirloom belonging to Maya's grandfather that Greg had tried to frame her with. "Miss Linwood," Marcus said quietly, his voice trembling, "I found this hidden in Greg's old locker after the police cleared out the shop. I knew it was yours. I should have spoken up that day when they threw your food. I was a coward, and I am so sorry. I brought it back to you. And I wanted to ask if you would ever let me learn from you. I want to learn how to listen to the machines the way you do." Maya looked at the antique wrench, her eyes glistening with a quiet warmth. She took the tool from his hands, feeling the familiar weight of her grandfather's legacy resting firmly in her palm. She didn't look at Marcus with anger. She looked at him with the grace of a true leader. "Saturday morning, Marcus. 6 a.m. sharp," Maya said, her voice steady and inspiring. "And remember to bring a notebook. We don't just look at screens here. We learn to listen." She turned toward the back wall of the shop, where a massive, framed photograph of a carbon fiber Pagani Huayra hung beneath the bright LED lights. Etched into the silver plate below the photo were the words her grandfather had passed down to her, words that had completely rewritten her destiny. "Expertise knows no color. Safety knows no compromise." Maya Linwood had walked into that Greenwich workshop holding a clipboard, facing a room full of people who expected her to fail simply because of who she was. She had walked out holding the future, not because anyone had granted her permission, but because she possessed a brilliant, unyielding talent that refused to be hidden in the shadows. True dignity, intellect, and excellence can never be defined by the clothes we wear, the tools we hold, or the color of our skin. Arrogance may build expensive walls, but a humble mind devoted to the truth will always have the power to tear them down. True genius doesn't need a permit from the elite. It simply outworks the noise. If you believe that character and talent will always triumph over prejudice, hit that subscribe button for Muse Stories right now. Share this video with someone who feels overlooked and leave a comment below. Have you ever had to prove your worth to someone who was too blind to see it?